Okay, in this lesson we are going to take a look at the basic approach to a logic game. This is essentially the strategy that you're going to use to solve every single game on the test regardless of its type. Before the game starts, it's always very important to know your goals. And by know your goals, I mean understand how many questions you need from this game and whether or not you can skip the game entirely. That's very important because basically if you get halfway through the game and you run up against a really high level difficulty question, it's important to know whether or not you need that point or whether you can afford to just move on and not worry about that question. So always know your goals. Next, we look at the strategy for dealing with the game setup. And the setup strategy is 4 steps. The first step is ID the game type and draw your master diagram. You've already learned how to ID the different types of logic games on the test. In the next few lessons, as we look at each one of those game types, we're going to learn how to draw a master diagram for each one of them. Step 2, diagram the rules. Again, we're going to learn how to do this as we go through each game type, but this will become second nature to you pretty quickly. Step 3, make inferences. Making inferences is where you combine the existing rules to come up with new rules and limitations for the game. And lastly, step 4 is draw your limited options. Limited options is a scenario in which a rule has narrowed the possible outcomes down to only 2 or 3, and you're going to completely draw out each one of those options because that's going to provide a ton of information as you approach the questions. So this is, again, our 4-step approach to dealing with a logic game setup. Next, let's look at how to deal with the questions. And once again, questions have 4 steps to them. First is ID the question type. On a large scale, is it global or local? And on a smaller scale, is it a list question or a could or must be true false question? The reason why this is important is because in step 2, we're going to choose our diagrams. And the type of diagram that you choose, meaning the master diagram or redrawing a question-specific diagram, is going to depend largely on the question type. If it's a high-level difficulty question, you're going to want to reuse work from other questions that have already shown you something about the possible outcomes. Step 3, answer the question. Once you've chosen your diagram and drawn it out completely, it should actually be very easy to find the answer choice that matches. Just keep in mind that if it's a high-level difficulty question, something that looks like it's going to be time-consuming, you probably want to leave it for the end of the game at the very least, maybe even for the end of the whole section if you don't really need that point to hit your score goal. And finally, watch your pacing. Always move on to the next game if you've hit your time limit for the game you're currently on. You don't want to sabotage your score by spending 15 minutes on one game and leaving no time for the remaining games where you really need to find the easy points in order to hit your score goal. So again, this is the basic approach to attacking any logic game in the section. To quickly recap, know your goals before you head into the section. Next, deal with the setup. Use our 4-step process for the setup. And finally, deal with the questions. Again, a 4-step process for the questions. In our next lesson, we're going to dive into our first sequencing game and walk through this process one step at a time.